I pulled into my driveway after 5 days in Houston and nearly drove straight into my mailbox because what I was seeing made absolutely no sense. My house, my beautiful custom-painted Victorian home in Portland, Oregon, was now a sickly shade of beige that looked like someone had mixed primer with watered-down oatmeal. The original colors, a historically accurate deep slate blue with cream and burgundy trim that had taken professional painters 2 weeks to apply last year, were completely gone. My hands were shaking as I put the car in park. This had to be some kind of nightmare. I rubbed my eyes, but when I opened them again, the beige monstrosity was still there. Every carefully chosen detail, every historically accurate accent, the hand-painted decorative elements that had cost me $3,000 alone, all of it was buried under this bland, lifeless color that looked like it belonged on a suburban McMansion, not a restored 1890s Victorian in the Alphabet District. I got out of my car slowly, my business suit suddenly feeling too tight. The February air in Portland was crisp and damp, but I barely noticed. I walked up to my front door, reaching out to touch the paint. It was dry, but recent enough that I could smell the chemical odor. They had even painted over my brass hardware, my custom door knocker, everything. The beautiful stained glass transom above the door had drips of beige paint on it. My phone was in my hand before I consciously decided to call anyone. I dialed my neighbor, Marcus Chen, who lived 3 houses down and had become a good friend since I moved to Portland 2 years ago. "Jason, you back already?" Marcus answered on the second ring. "Marcus, what the hell happened to my house?" My voice came out strangled. There was a pause. "Oh man, you saw it. Listen, I tried to stop them. I really did. I called you like 6 times, but it kept going to voicemail." I pulled my phone away from my ear and checked. 6 missed calls from Marcus, all from 3 days ago. I had been in back-to-back meetings with clients in Houston, and I remembered seeing his calls but being too swamped to call back, figuring it could wait until I got home. That decision was looking pretty stupid right now. "Who did this? Who painted my house?" I demanded. "The HOA." "Well, specifically, Linda Whitmore. She showed up Tuesday morning with a painting crew and told them this was an emergency violation correction. I went over there and told them you didn't authorize this, but Linda had all this paperwork saying the HOA had the right to correct violations at owner expense if they weren't addressed within the citation period." "What citation? What violation? I never got any citation." I was shouting now, pacing on my front lawn. "She said she sent you multiple warnings about your paint colors being in violation of the HOA standards." "Jason, I saw the whole thing. They just showed up and started painting. I even called the police, but they said it was a civil HOA matter and they couldn't intervene." I felt like I was going to be sick. "Marcus, I spent $12,000 on that paint job last year. It was a professional restoration. The colors were historically accurate. I had documentation from the Portland Historic Preservation Society." "I know, man. Everyone on the street knows. We all loved how your house looked, but Linda's been on a rampage lately. She's citing everyone for everything. The Johnsons got cited for having their garbage cans visible from the street for like 30 seconds. The Patels got cited because their holiday lights were the wrong shade of white." I thanked Marcus and hung up, staring at my house. I had bought this place specifically because it was a Victorian that needed restoration. I was James Whitaker, a software consultant who had made good money and wanted a project. This house had been that project. I had spent 2 years carefully restoring it, researching every detail, making sure everything was period appropriate. The paint job alone had required 3 different contractors before I found one who understood what I wanted. I walked around the entire house. Every single surface had been painted this horrible beige. They had even painted my decorative shutters, which had been a deep burgundy. The fish scale shingles on the third-floor turret, which I had paid to have individually restored and painted in an alternating cream and blue pattern, were now uniformly beige. The gingerbread trim, the corbels, the spandrels, everything was one flat, soul-crushing color. My hands were still shaking as I unlocked my front door. Inside, everything was chaos. They had clearly used my garden hose because there was a wet trail across my hardwood floors. There were paint splatters on my porch, paint on my windows, paint on the concrete walkway. They had been careless and fast, prioritizing coverage over quality. I dropped my suitcase in the hallway and went straight to my home office. My files were exactly where I had left them. I pulled out the folder labeled HOA and went through every piece of paper. There was the original HOA agreement from when I bought the house, the bylaws, the architectural guidelines, my approved renovation plans from 2 years ago, but nothing, absolutely nothing about any violation or any citation. I checked my email. Nothing from the HOA. I checked my physical mail, which Marcus had been kind enough to bring in and leave on my kitchen counter. Nothing from the HOA there either. I checked my spam folder, my trash, everything. There was no communication about any violation whatsoever. The HOA guidelines, which I pulled up on my computer, were frustratingly vague. They mentioned that exterior colors should be harmonious with the neighborhood and not garish or offensive. My house had been neither. It had been beautiful, elegant, and historically appropriate. Half the other Victorians in the neighborhood had similar color schemes. I took photographs of everything. The paint job, the splatters, the painted over hardware, the drips on the stained glass. I documented every single detail. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and tried to think rationally, which was difficult because I was angrier than I had been in years. The next morning, I was at the HOA office at 9 o'clock sharp. The Alphabet District HOA operated out of a small office in a commercial building on Northwest 23rd Avenue. The receptionist, a young guy who looked like he would rather be anywhere else, barely looked up when I walked in. "I need to speak to Linda Whitmore immediately," I said, keeping my voice level. "You have an appointment?" "No, but she had my house painted without my permission, so I think she can make time." That got his attention. He picked up his phone, spoke quietly for a moment, then hung up. "She'll be right out." Linda Whitmore emerged from a back office 3 minutes later. She was exactly what I had expected. A woman in her early 50s with an aggressive blonde bob, too much makeup, and an expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant. She was wearing a blazer with shoulder pads that looked like they belonged in a 1980s power dressing seminar. "Mr. Whitaker, I assume," she said, not offering to shake hands. "You painted my house," I said flatly. "We corrected a violation, yes. Perhaps if you had responded to any of our multiple citations, it wouldn't have been necessary." I never received any citations. Not one. Not by mail, not by email, not by any method. She made a dismissive gesture. "We have documentation that all proper notices were sent according to HOA bylaws. You failed to respond, and you failed to correct the violation. So we exercised our right under Section 14.3 of the HOA agreement to remedy the situation at your expense." My house was historically accurate. I had approval from the Portland Historic Preservation Society. The colors were appropriate for an 1890s Victorian. "The colors were not on the HOA approved list," Linda said, pulling out a folder. "All exterior paint colors must be from this approved palette." She showed me a sheet with about 20 different shades of beige, gray, and white. They all looked like various degrees of bland. That wasn't in the original HOA guidelines I received when I bought the house, I said, taking the sheet and examining it. The guidelines were updated 8 months ago at the annual HOA meeting. I never received notice of any update. All homeowners were sent registered letters, she said with a tight smile. Perhaps you should check your mail more carefully. I pulled out my phone and showed her my documentation. I keep every piece of mail. I have never received anything about updated guidelines. I certainly never received any violation notices. And even if I had, you don't have the right to paint someone's house without explicit written permission. Section 14.3 clearly states, I don't care what Section 14.3 says, you painted my house without permission. You did $12,000 worth of damage, and I will be taking legal action. Linda's expression hardened. Mr. Whitaker, I suggest you read your HOA agreement more carefully. You will be responsible for reimbursing the HOA for the correction costs, which came to $4,500. You'll be receiving an invoice. You want me to pay you for ruining my house, for bringing your house into compliance with community standards. Good day, Mr. Whitaker. She turned and walked back into her office, closing the door firmly behind her. The receptionist was staring at his computer screen like he wished he could disappear into it. I left the HOA office and sat in my car for a solid 5 minutes, just breathing. Then, I called my lawyer. Robert Chen, no relation to my neighbor Marcus, was a real estate attorney I had used when I bought my house. He listened to my entire story without interrupting, which I appreciated because I was talking fast and probably not making complete sense. Okay, Robert said when I finished. First things first, do you have documentation of your original paint job? Yes, photos, receipts, everything. I also have the approval from the Portland Historic Preservation Society. Good. Do you have your original HOA documents? Yes, all of them. And you're certain you never received any violation notices or updated guidelines? I keep everything, Robert. I'm meticulous about this stuff. Nothing. Not a single piece of paper about any violations or updates. Here's what we're going to do, Robert said. I'm going to request all documentation from the HOA regarding these alleged notices. They're required to provide proof of service if they claim they sent registered letters. If they can't provide that proof, they're in serious trouble. Meanwhile, I want you to get estimates for restoring your original paint job from at least 3 professional contractors. Document everything. Every photo, every receipt, every piece of evidence that shows what your house looked like before and after. What are my chances here? Robert paused. If what you're telling me is accurate, and they really did paint your house without proper notice or authorization, they're going to be liable for all damages. HOAs have a lot of power, but they can't just destroy someone's property without following proper procedures. The problem is, these cases can take time. How much time? Months, possibly. HOAs are notoriously difficult to sue because they have lawyers on retainer and they know most homeowners will give up rather than fight. But Jason, if you're willing to see this through, I think you have a strong case. I looked at my beige house through my car window. I'm willing to see it through. Over the next 2 weeks, I became intimately familiar with the legal process of suing an HOA. Robert sent a formal demand letter to the Alphabet District HOA, requesting all documentation of violation notices and asserting that the unauthorized painting constituted property damage and trespass. The HOA responded through their attorney, a woman named Patricia Morrison, with copies of what they claimed were the violation notices sent to me. The problem was, none of them had my signature. In Oregon, Registered mail requires a signature upon delivery. The HOA provided photocopies of envelopes with my address, but no proof that I had actually received them. Robert immediately caught this discrepancy. They're claiming they sent registered letters, but they can't provide any delivery confirmation, Robert explained during one of our meetings at his office in downtown Portland. That's a major problem for them. Either they didn't actually send the letters, or they sent them through regular mail and are lying about the registered part. What about the updated guidelines? I asked. That's even more interesting. I checked with the county records office. HOAs are required to file any major changes to their governing documents with the county. There's no record of any filing from the Alphabet District HOA in the last 2 years. I felt a surge of vindication. So they didn't legally update the guidelines. It appears not. Which means even if you had received the notices, which you clearly didn't, the new color palette they're trying to enforce isn't actually valid. The HOA's response to this information was to double down. I received an invoice for $4,500 for the violation correction, along with a notice that I was being fined $100 per day until I paid the invoice. I was also informed that the HOA was placing a lien on my property for unpaid fees. That was when I stopped being just angry and started being determined. They wanted to play hardball. Fine. We would play hardball. Robert filed a lawsuit in Multnomah County Circuit Court on my behalf. We were suing the HOA for property damage, trespass, violation of Oregon HOA statutes, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We were asking for actual damages to cover restoration costs, punitive damages, attorney fees, and an injunction preventing the HOA from taking any further action against me. The lawsuit made the local news. Apparently, a story about an HOA painting someone's house without permission was too juicy for the Portland media to ignore. A reporter from the Oregonian came to interview me, and a photographer took pictures of my beige house next to the before photos I provided. The article ran with the headline Alphabet District Homeowner Battles HOA over Unauthorized House Painting. The publicity had an unexpected effect. I started getting calls and emails from other homeowners in the neighborhood who had similar complaints about Linda Whitmore and the HOA board. The Johnsons, who Marcus had mentioned, reached out to tell me they had been fined $1,500 for a garbage can violation. The Patels had been cited for their holiday lights and threatened with daily fines. A couple named Doug and Sarah Martinez told me they had been forced to remove a rose garden that had been in their yard for 15 years, because Linda claimed it violated a setback requirement that didn't actually exist in the original HOA documents. I started compiling a list. By the end of March, I had statements from 12 different homeowners, all with stories of Linda Whitmore and the HOA board acting beyond their authority, making up rules and threatening excessive fines. Robert was thrilled. This establishes a pattern of behavior, he explained. It's not just a single incident with your house. It's a systematic abuse of power. The judge is going to want to see this. Our court date was set for mid-May, which gave me 2 months to live with my beige house and increasing fury. I got 3 estimates for restoration, and they all came in between $14,000 and $16,000. The paint job would cost more than the original because they would need to strip the new paint off completely to avoid an uneven surface, repair any damage from the hasty paint job, and then apply the historically accurate colors again. I chose the same contractor who had done the original work, a man named Pete Davidson who specialized in Victorian restoration. Pete was furious when he saw what had been done. "They painted right over the hardware," he said, shaking his head. "Look at this. They didn't tape anything off properly. There's overspray on your windows, on your roof shingles, on your concrete. This is the worst paint job I've seen in 20 years. And the paint they used is cheap exterior latex. It's already starting to peel in some places." Pete gave me a detailed estimate, $16,200 to fix everything properly. Robert added it to our lawsuit documentation. The HOA continued to escalate. In early April, I received a notice that my HOA privileges were being suspended, which apparently meant I couldn't use the neighborhood common areas, including the small park at the end of the street. I hadn't used the park once in 2 years, so that didn't bother me much. Then, I received another notice saying that my case was being referred to the HOA's collections agency for the unpaid invoice and fines, which now totaled over $8,000. Robert filed an emergency motion to prevent the HOA from placing a lien on my property or taking any collection action while the lawsuit was pending. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Rebecca Martinez, granted the motion and added a strongly worded note that the HOA should cease all potentially harassing actions against the plaintiff pending resolution of this matter. I took some satisfaction in that, but I was still living in a beige house that made me angry every time I looked at it. My neighbors were supportive. Marcus started a neighborhood petition supporting my case, and 37 homeowners signed it. The local news did a follow-up story. I even got interviewed on a Portland talk radio show about HOA overreach. Through all of this, I was still working. I was a software consultant, which meant I could work from home most of the time, but I also had clients who needed attention. It was hard to focus on database architecture and cloud migration when I was dealing with lawsuit preparation and media interviews. My stress levels were through the roof, and I was sleeping poorly. The preliminary hearing in late April was my first face-to-face encounter with Linda Whitmore since that confrontation at the HOA office. She sat at the defendant's table with 2 other HOA board members and their attorney, Patricia Morrison. Linda looked angry. The other board members, a man named Frank Sullivan and a woman named Deborah Reed, looked uncomfortable. Judge Martinez heard arguments from both sides. Patricia Morrison argued that the HOA had followed all proper procedures, that notices had been sent, and that the HOA was acting within its authority to enforce community standards. Robert countered with our documentation showing no proof of service, no valid updated guidelines, and a pattern of HOA overreach. Judge Martinez listened carefully, asked pointed questions, and then made her ruling. I'm going to allow this case to proceed to trial. However, I'm also going to order the HOA to produce, within 14 days, certified proof of delivery for all notices they claim to have sent to Mr. Whitaker. If they cannot produce this proof, the court will assume notice was not properly given. Additionally, the HOA must provide documentation showing that any guideline changes were properly filed with the county and communicated to all homeowners according to Oregon statute. This hearing is adjourned. Robert was pleased. She's not buying their story, he said as we left the courthouse. The burden of proof is on them now, and they're not going to be able to meet it. He was right. When the 14-day deadline came, the HOA's attorney filed a motion for an extension, claiming they needed more time to locate the documentation. Judge Martinez denied the motion and issued an order stating that the HOA's failure to provide proof of service would be taken as evidence that proper notice was not given. The trial was scheduled for late May. As we got closer to the date, I could see the HOA's position weakening. Patricia Morrison reached out to Robert with a settlement offer. The HOA would pay for half the restoration costs if I dropped the lawsuit and the punitive damages claim. "What do you think?" I asked Robert. "I think they're scared. They know they're going to lose. But it's your call, Jason. We can take the settlement, which gets you $8,000 and ends this now, or we can go to trial and potentially get full damages plus punitive damages, but that means more time, more stress, and a small risk that something goes wrong." I thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. "We go to trial. This isn't just about the money anymore. Linda Whitmore needs to learn she can't treat people like this." The trial began on May 28th in Multnomah County Circuit Court. It was a bench trial, which meant Judge Martinez would make the final decision rather than a jury. The courtroom was small and surprisingly informal, more like a large office than the dramatic courtrooms you see on TV. Patricia Morrison presented the HOA's case first. She argued that the HOA had a duty to maintain neighborhood standards, that my paint colors were in violation of approved guidelines, and that proper notices had been sent. She introduced photocopies of violation notices, the updated color palette guidelines, and testimony from Linda Whitmore about the HOA's enforcement procedures. Linda took the stand and testified that she personally oversaw the mailing of 3 violation notices to me over a 2-month period. She claimed that all notices were sent via registered mail and that the HOA kept meticulous records. "You have proof that Mr. Whitaker received these notices?" Robert asked during cross-examination. "We sent them to his address on file," Linda said stiffly. "That's not what I asked." "Do you have proof of delivery? A signature, a tracking number, anything that confirms Mr. Whitaker actually received these notices?" Linda hesitated. "We have copies of the envelopes." "Copies of envelopes don't prove delivery. Do you have a signed return receipt?" "We may have misfiled them," Linda said, her voice tight. "So your answer is no, you don't have proof of delivery." We followed our standard procedures, which apparently don't include keeping proof that you actually communicated with homeowners before damaging their property. No further questions. Robert then called me to the stand. I testified about buying the house, the careful restoration process, the historical research, and the $12,000 paint job. I showed photographs of the house before and after, and I could see Judge Martinez leaning forward to examine them closely. "Mr. Whitaker, did you receive any communication from the HOA about paint color violations before you returned from your business trip?" Robert asked. "No, none. Not by mail, email, phone, or any other method." "What was your reaction when you saw your house had been painted?" "I was shocked. Then I was angry. I had spent 2 years carefully restoring that house to historical accuracy. To see it painted over with cheap beige paint felt like vandalism." Patricia Morrison's cross-examination tried to suggest that I might have overlooked the notices, or that I had been negligent in checking my mail, but I had my documentation. I showed my meticulous filing system, my complete HOA correspondence file, and testimony from my mail carrier, a woman named Rita Johnson, who confirmed that she had never delivered any registered mail to my address from the HOA during the relevant time period. That testimony was devastating for the HOA's case. Rita had worked my route for 6 years, and she kept detailed records because registered mail required signatures. She testified that she would have remembered delivering multiple registered letters to my address, and she had no record of any such deliveries. Robert then called several of my neighbors as witnesses. Marcus testified about trying to stop the painters and calling the police. The Johnsons testified about their own experiences with excessive HOA fines. The Martinez couple talked about their rose garden. By the time Robert was done, he had painted a picture of an HOA board, specifically Linda Whitmore, that was out of control and acting beyond its authority. The most damaging testimony came from Frank Sullivan, one of the other HOA board members. Robert had subpoenaed him, and it became clear pretty quickly that Frank was not on the same page as Linda. "Mr. Sullivan, were you aware that the HOA was planning to paint Mr. Whitaker's house?" Robert asked. Frank shifted uncomfortably. "Not specifically, no. Linda handles most of the enforcement actions. As a board member, don't you have oversight of major expenditures like hiring a painting crew? In theory, yes. But Linda generally handles the day-to-day operations." "Did the full board vote on painting Mr. Whitaker's house?" Frank was silent for a long moment. "No." "Did the full board vote on the updated color palette guidelines?" Another pause. "I don't recall a specific vote on that." "Mr. Sullivan, isn't it true that, under the HOA bylaws, any major policy change requires a vote of the full board and notification to all homeowners?" "Yes." "And isn't it also true that any expenditure over $1,000 requires board approval?" "Yes." So Linda Whitmore authorized a $4,500 paint job without board approval, in violation of the HOA's own bylaws. Frank looked miserable. "It appears so." Patricia Morrison tried to rehabilitate Frank's testimony on redirect, but the damage was done. Judge Martinez had heard enough to understand that this wasn't just about improper notice. This was about an HOA president acting unilaterally, without proper authority, and damaging a homeowner's property. The trial lasted 2 days. On the afternoon of the second day, after closing arguments, Judge Martinez said she would take the matter under advisement and issue a written ruling within a week. Those were a long 7 days. I tried to stay busy with work, but I was constantly checking my email and my phone, waiting for news from Robert. Finally, on June 4th, Robert called me. "We won," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "We won everything." I sat down hard on my couch. Everything. Judge Martinez issued a 32-page ruling. She found that the HOA failed to provide any credible evidence of proper notice, that the updated guidelines were never properly adopted or filed, and that Linda Whitmore exceeded her authority in authorizing the paint job. She's ordering the HOA to pay for complete restoration of your original paint job, which she's setting at Pete Davidson's estimate of $16,200. She's also awarding you punitive damages of $25,000 for what she called a pattern of reckless disregard for proper procedures and homeowner rights. And she's awarding you full attorney fees, which Robert said came to about $18,000. I did the math quickly. That's almost $60,000. $59,200 to be exact. Plus, and this is the part I really like, Judge Martinez is ordering a forensic audit of the HOA's finances and enforcement actions for the past 2 years. She's also removing Linda Whitmore from the board and appointing a temporary administrator to oversee HOA operations until a new election can be held. I felt something I hadn't felt in months: relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. Robert, I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything. This was a righteous case, Jason. You were wronged, and now you're being made whole. Judge Martinez even mentioned in her ruling that she was concerned about what she called tyrannical HOA behavior, and that she hoped this ruling would send a message about the importance of following proper procedures. The ruling made the news again, this time with much more coverage. The Oregonian ran a front-page story with the headline "Judge Awards Homeowner $59,000 in HOA paint job case." The local TV stations picked it up. I even got calls from news outlets in other states asking about the case. Apparently, HOA horror stories were popular nationwide. The reaction in my neighborhood was overwhelmingly positive. My neighbors threw me a small celebration party at Marcus's house. People I barely knew stopped me on the street to congratulate me. The petition Marcus had started turned into a movement to reform the HOA entirely. Within 2 weeks, enough homeowners had signed on to force a recall election of the entire board. Linda Whitmore, for her part, disappeared from public view. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was consulting with lawyers about possibly appealing the judgment, but the HOA's attorney apparently advised against it. The ruling was thorough and well-reasoned, and an appeal would likely be unsuccessful and expensive. The HOA paid the judgment in mid-June. I received a check for the full amount, and I immediately hired Pete Davidson to begin the restoration work. Pete and his crew started in early July, and they took their time doing it right. They stripped all the beige paint, repaired the damage to the hardware and trim, and carefully reapplied the original historically accurate colors. The work took 3 weeks, and I was there for most of it, watching as my house came back to life. When Pete finished the final coat on the turret in late July, I stood in my front yard and just stared. It was perfect. It looked even better than it had before because Pete had taken extra care with every detail. "It's good to see it back the way it should be," Marcus said, walking up to stand next to me. "This house is a neighborhood landmark, you know. People take tours of the historic district just to see it." "I just wanted a place to call home," I said. "I didn't expect all of this." "You stood up for yourself. That takes guts. A lot of people would have just accepted what the HOA did and moved on. I couldn't do that. This house means too much to me." The HOA recall election happened in August. Linda Whitmore didn't run for re-election, and neither did Deborah Reed. Frank Sullivan ran again and won, along with 2 new members who campaigned on transparency and following proper procedures. The new board's first action was to formally rescind the unauthorized color palette guidelines and revert to the original HOA rules. The forensic audit that Judge Martinez had ordered was completed in September. It revealed some troubling findings. Linda Whitmore had been using HOA funds for personal expenses, including lunches, gas for her car, and even a weekend trip to Seattle that she claimed was HOA business but had no documentation for. The total amount of misappropriated funds came to about $8,000 over 2 years. The new HOA board referred the findings to the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office. I wasn't involved in that process, but I followed it in the news. In November, Linda Whitmore was charged with theft and abuse of a fiduciary relationship. She eventually pleaded guilty to a reduced charge and was sentenced to 2 years of probation and ordered to pay restitution to the HOA. By December, nearly a year after the whole nightmare had started, things had finally settled into a new normal. My house looked beautiful. The HOA was functioning properly under new leadership. My neighbors were happy, and I had a significant amount of money left over from the judgment after paying for the restoration and Robert's fees. I used some of that money to establish a small legal fund for homeowners in my neighborhood who had disputes with the HOA. It wasn't much, just enough to help people get initial legal consultations and advice. Robert agreed to serve as a consulting attorney for the fund, and several other lawyers in Portland offered to do pro bono work for homeowners who qualified. The whole experience changed my perspective on a lot of things. I had always been someone who avoided conflict, who tried to solve problems quietly and diplomatically. But sometimes, diplomacy doesn't work. Sometimes, you have to stand up and fight, even when it's uncomfortable and stressful and expensive. I thought about that one evening in late December, as I was putting up holiday lights on my house. I had chosen warm white lights, which I was pretty sure would have violated Linda Whitmore's arbitrary rules if she were still in charge. But she wasn't, and the new HOA board had made it clear they weren't going to micromanage homeowners' holiday decorations. Marcus walked by with his dog and stopped to chat. "House looks great," he said. "The lights really complement the paint colors." "Thanks. I'm just glad I can enjoy my own house again without worrying about some arbitrary violation. You know, what you did had a ripple effect. People in other Portland neighborhoods have been reaching out to our new HOA board asking for advice on reforming their own HOAs. You kind of started a movement." I hadn't thought about it that way, but Marcus was right. The local news coverage had sparked conversations about HOA reform across the city. Several neighborhood associations were reviewing their own governance structures and enforcement procedures. The Oregon State Legislature was even considering new laws to provide better oversight of HOAs and protect homeowner rights. "I just wanted my house back," I said. "Everything else is bonus." "Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone," Marcus replied. "That's what makes it matter." After Marcus left, I finished putting up the lights and went inside. My house was warm and comfortable, decorated for the holidays, and most importantly, it was mine. Not the HOA's, not Linda Whitmore's, but mine. I had fought for it, and I had won. The whole ordeal had cost me months of stress, countless hours of work, and more anger than I thought I was capable of feeling. But it had also taught me valuable lessons about standing up for what's right, about the importance of documentation and preparation, and about the fact that sometimes you have to fight battles you never wanted to fight. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down in my living room, looking out the window at my beautifully restored Victorian house. The slate blue paint looked almost purple in the fading winter light, and the cream trim glowed warmly. It was exactly the way it was supposed to be. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Heard from the DA's office. Linda Whitmore's probation officer is requiring her to take a course on fiduciary responsibility and community leadership ethics. Thought you'd appreciate the irony." I did appreciate it. I sent back a laughing emoji and set my phone down. Justice, I had learned, didn't always come quickly or easily, but when it did come, it was worth the wait. The new year came, and with it came a fresh start for the neighborhood. The new HOA board held an open meeting in January where they invited all homeowners to discuss their concerns and priorities. Over 100 people showed up, filling the community center to capacity. The board listened, took notes, and promised to be responsive and transparent. Frank Sullivan, who had been re-elected as board secretary, pulled me aside after the meeting. "I want to apologize," he said. "I should have been more involved before all of this happened. I let Linda run things without proper oversight, and you paid the price for that." "You testified honestly at the trial," I said. "That took courage." It was the right thing to do. She had gotten completely out of control, and I had been turning a blind eye to it. I won't make that mistake again. I believed him. Frank seemed genuinely committed to making sure the HOA operated properly going forward. The new board members, a woman named Patricia Nguyen and a man named Robert Kim, were equally committed to transparency and following the rules. Life moved on. I took on new consulting clients, including a major project with a Seattle tech company that required me to travel back and forth for several months. Before my first trip, I made sure to give Marcus my contact information and explicitly ask him to call me immediately if anything even slightly unusual happened with my house. I also notified the new HOA board that I would be traveling and provided multiple ways to contact me. Nothing happened while I was gone. My house remained exactly as I had left it, painted in its beautiful, historically accurate colors, maintained and respected. It was such a relief to come home and find everything exactly as it should be. Spring came to Portland, bringing the usual rain and the beautiful explosion of flowers that made the city famous. My garden, which I had somewhat neglected during the stress of the lawsuit, came back to life with tulips and daffodils and early roses. I spent my weekends working in the yard, pruning and planting, and generally enjoying the fact that I could do so without worrying about arbitrary HOA violations. The homeowner legal fund I had established was getting regular use. Several neighbors had consulted with Robert about various issues, mostly minor disputes that were resolved quickly once proper legal procedures were followed. The fund also helped the Martinez family get their rose garden officially grandfathered in as a pre-existing feature, protecting it from any future board members who might try to remove it. In late spring, I got a call from a reporter at a national magazine that was doing a story on HOA reform. They wanted to interview me as part of a larger piece about homeowner rights. I agreed, and the interview turned into a long conversation about property rights, community governance, and the balance between individual freedom and collective standards. The article came out in June, and it was surprisingly thoughtful. It presented my case as an example of what could go wrong when HOAs operated without proper oversight, but it also discussed the legitimate purposes of HOAs and how they could function effectively when properly managed. My house was featured in the photographs accompanying the article, looking beautiful and dignified in its restored colors. That article led to speaking invitations. I was asked to speak at a community planning conference in Seattle about HOA governance and homeowner rights. I was nervous about public speaking, but I accepted because I thought the message was important. The speech went well, and it led to more invitations from other cities and organizations. I never set out to become an advocate for HOA reform, but that's what happened. I started consulting with neighborhood associations and homeowner groups, sharing my experience and offering advice on how to structure HOAs to protect both community interests and individual rights. It became a side business that complemented my software consulting work. By the summer of my second year after the paint incident, my life had settled into a new rhythm. I was working on interesting consulting projects, speaking occasionally about HOA reform, and enjoying my beautifully restored house. The neighborhood was thriving under the new HOA leadership. Property values were up, community engagement was strong, and people generally seemed happy. I ran into Patricia Morrison, the attorney who had represented the HOA during the trial, at a legal conference in Portland where I was speaking. It was slightly awkward, but she approached me during the reception. "I want you to know that case changed how I advise HOA clients," she said. "I tell them now that following proper procedures isn't just good practice, it's essential." What Linda Whitmore did was indefensible, and I should have pushed back harder against her during my representation. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "Your house really is beautiful," she added. "I saw the photos in that magazine article. The colors are perfect for that style of Victorian." Linda was wrong about that, among many other things. It was a gracious acknowledgement, and I respected her for making it. The legal profession, I had learned, was full of people who were just doing their jobs, even when they were on the opposite side of cases. Patricia had defended the HOA because that was her job, but she had the integrity to acknowledge when her client had been in the wrong. As the year drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. 2 years earlier, I had pulled into my driveway after a business trip, and found my house painted an awful beige color. That moment had sparked a chain of events that had transformed my life in ways I never could have predicted. I had learned that justice exists, but you have to fight for it. I had learned that standing up for yourself can inspire others to do the same. I had learned that documentation matters, that procedures exist for good reasons, and that abuse of power, no matter how petty it might seem, deserves to be challenged. Most importantly, I had learned that home isn't just a place. It's an expression of who you are, a reflection of your values and your care and your vision. When someone violates that, they're not just damaging property. They're attacking something fundamental about your identity and your autonomy. My house stood as a testament to that truth. Every time I looked at it, I saw not just beautiful architecture and carefully chosen colors, but a reminder of what I had fought for and won. The slate blue walls, the cream trim, the burgundy accents, they weren't just paint. They were proof that standing up for what's right matters, even when it's difficult. The neighborhood around me had changed too. People were more engaged, more willing to question authority, more aware of their rights and responsibilities. The new HOA board operated transparently, held regular meetings, and made decisions collectively rather than allowing one person to dominate. It wasn't perfect, but it was so much better than what had come before. I never saw Linda Whitmore again after the trial. I heard she had moved to a different part of Portland, away from the Alphabet District. I didn't wish her ill, but I didn't feel sorry for her either. She had abused her position, hurt people who trusted her, and stolen money that wasn't hers. The consequences she faced were just and appropriate. On a cold evening in late December, almost exactly 2 years after the paint incident, I stood on my front porch with a mug of hot cider, looking out at my neighborhood. Holiday lights twinkled on houses up and down the street, each display unique and personal. No one was enforcing arbitrary rules about the correct shade of white or the appropriate level of decoration. People were free to express themselves, within reasonable bounds, and the neighborhood was more vibrant and interesting because of it. Marcus walked by, as he often did in the evenings, and joined me on the porch. We stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the neighborhood. "You ever regret it?" Marcus asked. "All the stress and the fighting and the legal bills." I thought about it honestly. The whole experience had been exhausting and infuriating and expensive, even with the judgment covering my costs. It had consumed months of my life and caused more stress than I care to remember. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret it. This house, this neighborhood, it's worth fighting for." And if I hadn't fought, Linda would still be in charge, still bullying people, still abusing her power. Sometimes you have to stand up, even when it's hard. "That's why you're kind of a neighborhood legend now," Marcus said with a grin. "The guy who took on the HOA and won." "I just wanted my house back," I said, echoing what I had told him many times before. "Yeah, but you got more than that. You got justice. You got reform. You got a whole movement started. That's not nothing." He was right, of course. It wasn't nothing. What had started as a personal violation had become something larger, something that mattered to more people than just me. That didn't make the initial anger and shock any less real, but it did give the whole experience meaning beyond my individual circumstances. As winter deepened and a new year approached, I found myself feeling genuinely content. My house was beautiful. My neighborhood was healthy. My work was fulfilling. And I had learned lessons about standing up for myself that would serve me for the rest of my life. The story of how an HOA painted my house without permission, and how I fought back and won, had become a story about more than just paint colors. It was about property rights and community governance and the importance of accountability. It was about the fact that ordinary people can challenge institutional power and win. It was about the idea that home matters, that beauty matters, that justice matters. Years from now, when people ask me about my beautiful Victorian house and its striking color scheme, I would tell them the story. I would tell them about coming home to find it painted beige, about the months of legal battles, about standing in front of a judge and fighting for what was right. I would tell them about Linda Whitmore's downfall and the HOA's reform and the neighborhood's transformation. But mostly, I would tell them about the importance of standing up for what you believe in, even when it's hard, even when it's scary, even when the odds seem against you. Because sometimes justice does prevail. Sometimes the little guy does win. Sometimes doing the right thing makes a difference that extends far beyond your own circumstances. My house stood as proof of that truth, its slate blue walls and cream trim gleaming in the winter light, a testament to the power of persistence and the importance of fighting for what's right. It was more than just a house now. It was a symbol, a reminder, a victory that would endure for as long as the building stood. And that, I thought as I finished my cider and went inside to the warmth of my home, was worth every moment of the fight.